Greater Sonic Wave. There's two camps of belief on this one that we're going to go through. So we're going to start this the way we normally do, and I'm going to read through the tooltip, and then we'll break some of it down and how it interacts with a lot of the other changes made this week. So Greater Sonic Wave, of course, drops from our new Slayer creatures this week that we got. And with this, it's got a 5-second cooldown, does 40 to 160% ability damage, gives you an extra 6% accuracy on your next ability, and gains plus 100 ability damage for 4.2 seconds, and requires 75 magic. But there's something that's not mentioned in the tooltip that needs to be mentioned regarding this. And did you want to go here first, Taxi? The interactions with Chain, or where do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, let's break down a little bit of like the weird interactions with this ability, because effectively, whenever it hits a target, you get that 100% ability damage for 4.2 seconds. Now, you'd say it's a single hit, single target ability, but when you use this with Greater Chain and Coroming, you can hit up to 7 targets with it, which will give you up to 700 ability damage. It's not listed on the tooltip, but it is something that does have an interaction. So effectively, 100, for the folks that like don't know, to put context on what this 100 ability damage kind of line is, for folks who have tier 90 plus gear, you tend to sit like 2200 to 2400 give or take ability damage. That's like the number we're looking at as our base. We'll say 2300 as like a nice average round, but people who are very high, like tier 95s and are running that kind of stuff, will have slightly higher. 100 extra for those people is like 4.5-5%. Like, it's nothing to write home about, and it basically, as long as you're using Sonic, if you use Sonic Wave every third ability, you would just get that extra 5% damage on every other hit that you deal, which is nice. That is a not insignificant buff. The thing that is crazy about this, though, is that if you think about that Coroming interaction, you can hit if you use this ability right after Greater Chain, you can hit 7 targets with it, up to 7 targets if there are 7 targets within range, which gives you 700 ability damage, which puts you at 3000, which is effectively a, like, give or take 30 to 35% damage buff for the next 2 abilities-ish. That is, every 10 seconds you can do that. So you effectively, like, 2 out of every 5 abilities could have that. Now, given you'd also have to use Chain and Sonic Wave out of your other 2 out of every 5 abilities. So, like, yeah, like, you know, give or take. But it is a very significant damage buff, especially if you need very brief burst window, and you have multiple targets, right? So it's one of those niche things where if you have multiple targets and if you have all these unlocks, this could be really just, like, kind of ridiculously powerful. But it's oddly situational, and I kind of like that, because the other thing they did this week is that they put Sonic Wave and Concentrated Blast on the same cooldown timer. So if you use one, you cannot use the other until they're both back off cooldown. Which did do some things to, like, if you were using a staff for this, or swapping between staff and wand, you can't use both of these powerful abilities now. But the thing that's, like, worth noting here in terms of, like, people are saying that is a nerf to magic, and I've been kind of struggling to see exactly how that happens, to be totally honest, because the thing that, like, I think about with this is, what do you lose when you do one over the other? So, you've got Concentrated Blast on one hand, you've got Sonic Wave on the other hand. Concentrated Blast, obviously, like, ramping critical chance increase. It's a channeled ability, so if you have, for some reason, a fractured staff in a, thing, you could use that. It's the whole thing. For, like, our very high-end people, that is something to think about. But for somebody who's using, like, primarily wands and orbs, like, the Sonic Wave change doesn't matter to them. They're not going to be using the other one. For somebody using primarily staff, same kind of a deal. You've just gotten a straight buff.
Yeah.
If you're using fractured staff, they're meaning to nerf that, but that's, like, its a whole own thing.
Yeah, and their official reasoning is that Magic right now has a lot of power at the baseline, but with that, it's reliant on dual wield spamming greater concentrated blast. And their perception on this is that stabs were falling way behind dual wield. And the part, and I asked David about this, our host who does high-end PVM, what he thought about this, and he said it comes down to a question of whether or not Sonnic Wave will be used in a 4-tick rotation again, because the rotations it's built, his opinion is that they'll only see rack used when stunning a target, and with that, that means there will be no Sonnic Wave in the rotation, thus a decrease in DPS. And he sums it up as being at non-stunnable bosses like AOD, it's a small but meaningful nerf, but at bosses that are stunnable, it's a fairly meaningful nerf to the so-called meta, as it were, the people who do the 4-tick auto attack with the dual wield staff swap.
And again, I'm not sure if he's if he was aware of the extra ability damage on things. So, he's undeniably right. If you have a single target in front of you, no ads, no nothing, greater concentrated blast will unquestionably outperform. It just does ridiculously much damage in a fully optimized setup. Same thing with the fractured staff spec, right? Those two kind of balance each other out in terms of expensive and important upgrades for their respective styles. Greater Sonnic Wave, I think, again, if you've got multiple targets, it might be better, but you still you're going to be using concentrated blast during the next 5-second cooldown while you're waiting for your chain to come back up. In that case, if you have both available to you, Sonnic Wave is not the one you want to use. But with that said,
and
changes, people are saying it's a nerf because there's some again, maybe I just don't understand the rotation that he's talking about. Obviously rack is a big deal too, but he's throwing rack details in here. I'm sure this is related in some way that I'm just completely missing. But to me, they increase the damage on rack. So the other thing to think about is, let's talk briefly about the rack change as well, just as part of this. So the rack change, they went from having the average damage of rack be 56% to now the average damage of rack is 90% ability damage. And they somewhat lowered the bonus if the target is bound or stunned, which may be what David's talking about in the middle of this. I'm not totally sure. But the thing to note there is that with rack now dealing 90% ability damage, well, guess what? Regular Sonnic Wave, not greater. Regular Sonnic Wave's average damage is, it's 91.2%. So the difference, if you're just using dual wield, you just use rack now, and you lose, over the course of a minute, 5% weapon spell damage. You lose 200 damage per minute. That doesn't seem like that big of a nerf to me. Just, to be totally honest with you. And again, maybe there's some other stuff where you're interacting it with other abilities. But as far as I can tell, rack has a shorter cooldown and does the same damage as old Sonnic Wave. Sonnic Wave did have an accuracy buff attached to it, but that really wasn't that impactful with endgame, where you're going to be getting accuracy is kind of capped anyways. That's very much a buff for people who are still in the mid game.
And what I really see with the Sonnic Wave changes and the greater Sonnic Wave is that this has given stabs something. And, we need to be 100% honest that nobody is going to 100% camp a staff if they're doing high-level PVM. Just like nobody is going to 100% camp dual wields if they're going to do that. They're going to do the 4-tick auto-attacking swap. So even if it is a couple of percentage points... I don't want to say nobody
can.
No,
it's certainly reasonable to just camp one style.
It is.
Because gamers are not going to do that.
Right.
But the majority of people who are killing the majority of bosses are probably not doing terribly sweaty multi-weapon switching things.
Exactly. And that's the same category that I fall into. Whenever I would use magic, I would just sit on my wand and orb, if I'm being 100% honest. And with that, where I think this falls in is that I see stabs in greater Sonnic Wave when paired with Chain. And, if you want to throw Kuroming into it, I see that being the Slayer option, if I'm being 100% honest.
I think it's just generally multi-target, is what I'm going to say, is that they've added in a bunch of like buffs to multi-target scenarios with staves, and they've kept Wand and Orb be relatively like you are going to hit a single target a lot and hard.
Yeah,
again,
and that's a good summary for it, right? And
not what it was supposed to be, like, well, not what it was meant to be.
I don't remember back to the beginning of EOC with that. Do you?
I'm pretty sure that was the idea.
Okay. I'm going to believe you on that. And I think there's also a question that comes up in the community about this is, are these game-breaking changes? Are these changes of a magnitude that are going to be as large as the Fractured Staff and Animate Dead changes? And the answer to that is no.
Well, I mean, I would make a strong argument that for stuff like the Zook Arena, like, staves this week are just much better there. Just much, much better there than they were last week. Like, it's not close. Like, if you have Greater Chain and Greater Sonnic Wave, you're hitting like a truck in there now. You just have 35% extra damage 40% of the time. Like, you can time your burst around that, right? Same thing with, like, people have been using, like, we have people in this game who are plenty good enough to time their burst windows and use their thresholds in that specific window. So, like, I don't know. Again, there are scenarios where this is a huge change, and overall it's super nice. And for the most time, like, is the average player going to really notice any changes from this other than a little extra damage if they're using staff? I don't think so.
Exactly.